The sun was sinking low over the Texas plains, smearing the sky with streaks of orange and crimson. The air was heavy with the scent of dry earth and the faint rustle of wind through brittle grass. Luke Carson guided his horse, Dusty, back toward the ranch, his body weary but his mind alert in the way of a man who had lived most of his life under open skies. He had spent the day patching a long stretch of barbed wire fence, his palms raw from twisting metal, his shirt soaked with sweat. That kind of work dulled the edges of loneliness, but when the sun began to fall, and the horizon stretched wide and empty, the silence always pressed in on him. Luke had grown used to it, the creak of the saddle, the solitary dinners in a cabin meant for two, the conversations that never went past his lips because there was no one there to hear them. The land had taken his father, the war had taken his brother, and the years had taken any notion that life might hand him something different. Out here, in the heart of nowhere, there was only work, silence, and the occasional song of a coyote. He slid from the saddle, giving Dusty a rough pat on the neck before loosening the reins. The horse tossed its head and blew hot breath into the cooling night. Luke stooped to unbuckle the gear when a sound prickled the back of his neck, a rustle, faint, unnatural. Too soft for cattle, too hesitant for the wild pigs that sometimes sniffed around. His hand froze mid-motion. Luke had spent enough time in the wilderness to know when something wasn't right. Slowly, he set the saddle aside and reached instinctively toward the knife at his hip. He listened. The sound came again, a shuffle, uneven, as though someone tried to stay hidden but lacked the strength. His brow furrowed. The noise led him toward the barn, its wooden sides weathered gray by years of sun. He moved silently, boots sinking into the dust, his eyes narrowing in the dim light. As he turned the corner, he stopped dead. She was there. A woman, huddled against the side of the barn, half swallowed by shadows. Her knees were drawn to her chest, her arms wrapped tight around them, like she was trying to make herself disappear. Strands of hair, tangled and matted with dirt, veiled most of her face, but what little he could see was gaunt, hollow. Her dress was torn in several places, stained with mud and something darker. Luke's breath caught. Out here, in the middle of miles and miles of nothing, a woman like her was as out of place as a bird in the desert. For a second, he thought she might be a ghost, some figment conjured by loneliness. But then she lifted her head. Her eyes met his, wide, raw, and glistening with something between terror and shame. They held him there, locked in a silence so sharp it felt like it might slice through bone. She opened her mouth, lips trembling, and a voice rasped out, hoarse and brittle. "I'm filthy, inside and out." Luke stiffened. The words hit like a blow, unexpected and heavy with meaning he couldn't yet grasp. She didn't just mean dirt on her skin. No, there was something deeper, something corroding her from within, and she had said it like a confession, as though his very presence demanded it. His instinct was to move closer, to kneel and ask what had happened, but he stayed rooted to the spot. He was a man who had seen cattle torn open by coyotes, storms that snapped trees like twigs, men broken by war. He had thought himself hardened, immune to shock. But this was different. This was human wreckage in front of him, and it froze him where he stood. She shifted slightly, the movement making her flinch as if every muscle ached. He noticed then the bruises along her arms, ugly and purple against pale skin, and the raw scrapes on her knuckles. Dirt clung to her like a second skin, but it was the way she curled in on herself that spoke louder than any wound. This wasn't just a body that had been through hell, it was a soul that believed itself lost. Luke finally found his voice, though it came low and uncertain. "Miss, are you hurt?" Her laugh was short and bitter, more a crack in her throat than any real sound. "Hurt," she whispered, shaking her head. "I'm ruined. People like me, we don't come back." The words stung in the still air. Luke felt his chest tighten, an ache rising that he didn't understand. He took a cautious step closer, hands raised slightly, not to scare her. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "Nobody's gonna touch you." Her eyes darted to his, searching for lies, for the trick hidden in his tone. She had the look of someone who'd been promised safety before, only to have it stolen away. Her hands trembled as she clutched at her knees, nails digging into her skin. "I shouldn't be here," she murmured, voice breaking. I don't deserve to be here." Luke's jaw clenched. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, but the weight of her despair held the words in his throat. Instead, he studied her, every ragged breath, every quiver. This wasn't just a lost traveler or someone down on her luck. This was a woman running from something, or someone. And though she was cloaked in filth and fear, there was something beneath it, flickering faintly like a dying ember. A strength, hidden but not gone. Luke had spent his life fixing what was broken: fences, barns, the endless wear of the land. But this was different. You couldn't mend a soul with barbed wire and strong hands. And yet, as he stood there, staring at the fragile figure hunched before him, he knew one thing for certain: if he turned her away, she wouldn't survive the night. The prairie stretched wide around them, vast and indifferent. But in that moment, in the shadow of the barn, the world had narrowed to just two people: the rancher and the stranger who had confessed her filth to him, inside and out. And Luke Carson, frozen in shock, realized he was standing at the edge of something that would change his life forever. Luke crouched slowly, making sure his boots scraped against the dirt so she could hear him coming. The last thing he wanted was to startle her. Her body already looked coiled like a spring, ready to bolt, even though she clearly didn't have the strength to run. "You're safe here," he said, his voice steady but low, like he might speak to a spooked horse. "Whatever you've been through, you don't have to face it alone anymore." Her eyes flickered, sharp and suspicious. She had probably heard words like that before, sweet promises from lips that later turned cruel. She shook her head violently, strands of dirty hair whipping across her face. "You don't understand," she rasped. "I've done things. Been forced into things. Things that stick to you, no matter how much you scrub." Her voice cracked, and her fingers dug into her knees until her knuckles whitened. "No water can wash this off me. No prayer can make me clean." Luke's throat tightened. He didn't ask for details, he didn't need them. The truth was already written on her in bruises and shadows. His gut twisted with anger, not at her, but at the unseen hands that had marked her this way. Whoever had broken her had left more than scars on her skin, they had tried to break her soul. Still, Luke didn't move closer. He reached instead for the wool blanket hanging over a rail inside the barn. It was old, rough, but clean, smelling faintly of cedar. With slow movements, he draped it over her trembling shoulders. She flinched at the first touch, pulling back like she expected a blow, but when the weight of the fabric settled around her, she stilled. Her breathing hitched. She pulled the blanket tighter, almost disappearing inside it, as though it were the first armor she'd worn in a long time. Luke caught a flicker of something soft in her expression, relief, maybe even gratitude, but it vanished quickly, buried under layers of shame. The silence between them stretched, heavy but not unbearable. The prairie night hummed beyond the barn, the faint chirp of crickets, the far-off howl of a coyote. Yet in the little circle of space they shared, everything felt still. Then she whispered, so faint he almost didn't catch it. "You'll hate me when you know." Luke shook his head, his jaw tightening with resolve. "I don't need to know right now," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel dragged across stone. "What I do know is you're hurt. And hurt can heal." She stared at him like he was speaking a language she didn't understand. Hope flickered in her eyes, small, dangerous, like a spark that had been stomped out too many times. She opened her mouth, then closed it, as if the words she wanted to say had burned away before they reached her lips. Luke leaned back on his heels, keeping his distance but refusing to leave her alone in her wreckage. He had seen storms flatten whole acres, fires scorch the earth, but the land always found a way to grow green again. If the earth could heal, maybe she could too. But it wouldn't happen in one night. "You got a name?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then shook her head. Whether she truly didn't want to tell him or couldn't bear to speak it aloud, he couldn't tell. He decided not to press. Names could come later. Safety had to come first. He stood and motioned toward the cabin across the yard. "It ain't much," he admitted. "But there's a roof, a bed, and food. You can rest there. No strings, no questions." Her eyes widened, panic flashing. She shook her head again, pulling the blanket tighter like a shield. "No, if I go in there, you'll—" She stopped herself, biting down hard on her lip. Luke knew what she was thinking. The world had taught her that men only gave kindness to take something in return. He crouched again, meeting her gaze squarely. His voice came steady, weighted with truth. "I don't want nothing from you. Not your body. Not your secrets. Just, let me help." Her chest rose and fell, uneven. She studied him with a suspicion sharpened by survival, as though she was waiting for the mask to drop, for his eyes to shift and reveal the monster she expected him to be. But Luke's gaze didn't waver. He had no mask. Only a simple, stubborn honesty born from years of hard living. Finally, her shoulders sagged, just slightly. Exhaustion pulled at her features, dragging her down like stones in a river. She nodded, once, small and uncertain. Luke exhaled slowly, as though he had been holding his breath since the moment he found her. He extended his hand, palm open, not forcing, only offering. She hesitated, staring at it like it was a trap. But then, with trembling fingers, she reached out. Their hands met. Her skin was cold, fragile as bird bones, but alive. He guided her carefully, not rushing, across the yard. Each step looked like it might topple her, but she clung to the blanket and to some faint thread of trust that was just beginning to weave between them. Inside the cabin, the air was warm from the embers still glowing in the fireplace. Luke lit a lantern, its glow spilling across the wooden walls and worn furniture. He fetched a pot of water, set it on the stove, and busied himself without looking at her too closely, giving her space. She stood just inside the doorway, eyes darting around like a trapped animal. The cabin was simple but safe, and for the first time, she allowed herself to sink down into a chair by the fire. The blanket slipped slightly, revealing the raw marks along her collarbone. She caught Luke's glance and pulled the fabric back up, her face flushing with shame. "Thank you," she murmured, so quietly he almost didn't hear it. Luke only nodded, his throat too tight to reply. He wasn't a man of many words, but he didn't need them. What mattered wasn't what he said, it was what he did. And right now, all he intended to do was prove, night by night, that not every man in the world meant harm. As he poured hot water into a basin and set it on the table beside her, he caught her watching him, hesitant, wary, but softer than before. She wasn't healed, not by a long shot. But something in her had shifted. Luke realized then what had truly frozen him in shock that night. It wasn't her brokenness, her bruises, or even her confession of filth. It was the glimpse he caught beneath it all, the stubborn ember of strength that refused to die. And he knew, with a certainty as deep as the Texas soil, that he would not let that ember burn out.